All right, section 1.5, rewriting equations and formulas. Now here's the great news. We started this last year. You did some of this last year. So here we go. We're going to rewrite literal equations, use formulas and rewrite them for area and other common formulas. So let's review that a literal equation is an equation that has two or more variables. To rewrite a literal equation, we have to solve for one variable in terms of the others. So, example 1. I want you to solve the equation 3y plus 4x equals 9 for y. That means I want to get you to solve for y in terms of x. Get the y by itself. So pause the video and do it yourself to see if you remember this from last year. All right? If you did it correctly, this is what you get. I'd first subtract the 4x to the other side. Now, you could have negative 4x plus 9, or you could have 9 minus 4x. Either one of those would be acceptable. I then divide everything by 3, which means this will give me y equals negative 4/3 x plus 3. The negative 4/3 x could also be negative 1 1/3 x plus 3. But remember, I have to take the 9 divided by 3 as well to give me a 3. Now, if you solved it and you got this, would this be an acceptable answer? Absolutely. These two answers are equivalent. Example number 2. Solve the literal equation for x. Now, this is what we kind of worked on the other day. Here, we have x in more than one term. So what the first thing you have to do is get everything on the other side except the terms that have the x in them, which in this case we already have. So we have the y on the left, and we have the 3x and the plus 5xz on the right. What I now have to do is use distributive property. Distributive property can be done the opposite way. Instead of multiplying in, I can divide out. So I want to divide out the x. So if I divided the x, that would give me 3 plus 5z. Now I have to get rid of a multiplication of 3 plus 5z, which means I use division property. So I divide by 3 plus 5z on both sides. So that gives me x equals y divided by 3 plus 5z. So my final answer is x equals y divided by 3 plus 5z. The x is solved in terms of the other variables. Now, using formulas. These formulas you have all used before. A formula shows how one variable is related to one or other variables. A formula is a type of literal equation. So here's a formula we learned last year. It's the surface area of a rectangular prism. I want you to solve this equation for L. So we have S equals 2LW plus 2LH plus 2WH. The first thing I want to do is move all the terms to the other side that do not have an L in them, which means I'm going to subtract the 2WH. That would give me S minus 2WH equals 2LW plus 2LH. I now have more than one term with a letter in it, so I have to use the distributive property and divide it out. So I'm going to divide out the L and get 2W plus 2H. I now have to divide both sides by 2W plus 2H. So the length is going to be equal to S minus 2WH, all divided by 2W plus 2H. Now, later on, we could actually do something with this, but we have not learned how to deal with binomials divided by binomials, which would be complex rational expressions. We haven't done that yet. So this is just going to be your answer. So right here are some other formulas that you've dealt with. Temperature, simple interest, and distance. So try to do this one on your own. We did this exact problem last year. I want you to take that temperature formula and solve it for F. Pause the video. All right. If you did it correctly, this is what you should get. The first thing we do is multiply by the reciprocal of 5/9, which is 9/5. That gives me 9/5 C equals Fahrenheit minus 32. So I add 32 to both sides. So my equation would be Fahrenheit, or F, equals 9/5 C plus 32. We're going to skip to another example, number 7. And I want you to deposit $5,000 in an account that earns simple interest. After 6 months, the account earns $162.50 interest. What is the annual interest rate? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to write down the formula you learned last year. Could you plug in 5,000 for the I? I'm sorry, for the P. The $162.50 in for the I and go from there? Absolutely. But what do we need to find? We need to find the rate. So let's solve for R first. Well, the opposite of multiplying by a T and a P would be dividing by a P and a T. So I divide both sides by P and T. And I get the rate as equal to I divided by P multiplied by T. So I plug it in. The interest is $162.50 divided by 5,000, which is the principal, multiplied by the time, which is 6 months. But remember, time is in what? Time's in years, so we have to do a half. So if we solve, we get the rate, which is equal to 65 hundredths. But that's as a decimal. We want the rate as a percent. So their interest rate would be 6.5%. All right, and our last example that we're going to go over, number 8. A truck driver averages 60 miles per hour while delivering freight to a customer. On the return trip, he averages 50 miles per hour due to construction. The total driving time is 6 6/10 hours. How long does each trip take? Well, if we look at our formula, we're talking about a distance problem. We know that distance equals rate times time. Rate multiplied by time. But we want to know how long the trip takes. So what we can do, now by the way, let me explain this to you, that we could actually solve this a multitude of other ways. This is only one way to solve it. But if I want to find time, I'm going to write this as T equals D divided by R, because if I divide both sides by R, I would get time equals distance divided by rate. So, D divided by R. What do we know? We know that if we take D divided by R, now remember, this is time, this is really time. The time of one trip plus the time of the other trip gives me a total of 6.6 hours. But what does T equal? T equals D divided by R. So I could do D divided by R plus D divided by R, both trips. So one way, let's say the first one is D divided by a rate of 60 plus D divided by a rate of 50 equals 6.6. If I found a common denominator, that would be 300. So if we did do that, I'm just going to go ahead and skip that step and get 11D, or 11/300ths D, equals 6.6. I now multiply both sides by 300. 11D equals 1980. Divide both sides by 11. D equals 180. So what does that mean? That means the distance is 180 miles. But I don't want to find the distance. I want to find how long does each trip take. Well, what are you going to do? We plug it in. So I'm going to take 180 divided by 60 and 180 divided by 50. So what does that give me? Three hours, and the return trip would take 180 divided by 50, which is 3.6 hours. So 3 hours to deliver to a customer, and on a return trip, 3.6 hours.